Love is in the air. Is it? Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are as well. If you've been here before, I appreciate you. If you're new to my channel, very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody is doing very well. Here I am again in a new spot. We're in a short-term rental right now and hopefully it'll only be for a month. I don't want to talk too much about the details because I am superstitious like that. Just if everything goes well, we'll be in our permanent location very soon. But for now, we're in a furnished rental. Cute little house, but had to, of course, come up with another setup. This isn't great, and I know this isn't the only video I'm going to record here, so I might experiment with some new locations within this location. But not that you guys care about that. What are we doing here today? So February, Valentine's Day. I have in mind what my thumbnail is going to look like, and if I have captured it correctly, you will have determined correctly that I think Valentine's Day is bullshit. Yes, I am one of those cynics where I think it is a thing that is perpetuated by retail and people who make money off of consumerism and all of that, blah, blah, blah. It's not that I don't believe in romance. I love romance. To have a holiday where you buy a bunch of crap to display your love, it's not for me. My husband and I don't completely ignore it. I mean, we'll get little things like my husband loves Oreos, and right now Oreo is doing this thing where they decorate Oreos really fancy. You can get writing put on them and everything, and I think it's super cute. And I know my husband loves Oreos, and even if it wasn't A, Valentine's Day, well, especially that it's not Valentine's Day, or B, that our anniversary is coming up. Our anniversary is in February as well. I'd get him the Oreos, but because our anniversary is coming up, it's not going to be for Valentine's Day. Our anniversary is coming up, I'm going to get him these special Oreos. How did I get on this track of Oreos? So my husband and I don't ignore it. We might get, if I see a funny card, I love giving cards, I will get him a Valentine's Day card, but I don't expect flowers. I don't parade around in slutty lingerie, not on Valentine's Day anyway. But it is an excuse for me to talk about some books. Some maybe I have talked about before, some I haven't, but I'm here to talk about love. Now, because I might have mentioned on my little thumbnail what I think about romance or Valentine's Day, I haven't really decided. Romance is not my favorite genre. There's been a couple that I enjoyed, but I don't reach for them typically. You know, I do succumb to the hype. Like I still want to read Book Lovers by Emily Henry because I've not heard a bad word about it. Beth O'Leary, she writes some cute stuff. So, you know, I'll read some books not because they're romance though. It's because I've heard so much great things about a book. But in this video, I am going to talk about books that celebrate love in other ways. Now, I am going to have some romance books on here. I'm going to break this down in a couple of sections. But mostly I'm going to talk about books that are about non-romantic love. Let's just get into it. First thing I'm going to talk about is Love of Life. And I have one book for this little category, and that is Papillon by Henri Charrière. This is a nonfiction book about Henri himself, and it takes place in 1931 where he is wrongfully convicted of a murder that he did not commit. He's sentenced to life of imprisonment in the penal colony of the French Guiana. It basically tells the story of multiple escape attempts because he just refuses to be in a cage for the rest of his life for something he did not do. And the escape attempts are just crazy. He tries so many times that they actually move him to a place called Devil's Island, which is just that. The prison is the island. Nobody can escape. It's shark-infested waters. If you even manage to get out of the structure and into the water, you're doomed. But he tries to escape from there as well. And it is an amazing story. Henri himself is a super compelling character. He's great to read about. It also talks about a friendship that he has in prison that is just amazing. The story is just amazing. And so, yes, Love of Life, Papillon. The next category I'll talk about is love between children and their parents. I have 3 books that I want to talk about. The first one is one of my all-time favorites, and that is Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This was tied for first place as my favorite book of 2022. This follows Ike and Buddy Lee. They are fathers who come together to find out what happened to their sons who were married to each other and they were murdered. Ike, who is black, and Buddy Lee, who is white, both of whom are ex-convicts. They decide to get on the road and head up an investigation on their own. Meanwhile, they are dealing with the fact that before their son's death, they did not accept them for who they were. They didn't accept their lifestyles as gay men. And of course, so in their trek of hunting down their son's killers, they are dealing with guilt and remorse and regret and all this time lost. And it's beautiful. It's touching. The dialogue between Ike and Buddy Lee are amazing. At the core of everything that's driving these men is their love for their sons. You know, it really just kind of shines a light on the fact that we are human. People criticize it for kind of highlighting the fact that these men shunned their sons for being gay. Well, that happens, and I don't think this book is glorifying it. And I don't want to get too political. Ultimately, these men come together for justice for their sons, and they carry it out. And it's action-packed and just hard to put down. I absolutely love this book. An excellent story of the love between parents and children. The next book I want to tell you about is Leaving Time by Jodi Picoult. Jodi Picoult is one of my favorite authors, and this is probably my top 3 of my favorite books by her. I'm probably biased because one of the main characters studies elephants and grief among elephants. I am a huge proponent of elephants, love elephants. This particular story follows Jenna, who is a teenager, I believe, somewhere between right around 12 or 13 years old, if memory serves. She has not stopped thinking about her mother, who died 10 years before in the wake of a tragic accident. So Jenna wants to find out what happened to her. Why is, her mother is missing. Her mother, who is Alice, studied elephants. She kept journals through all of this. And Jenna has her hands on these journals, and she's trying to find kind of the key of what happened to her mom, why she disappeared, where she is now. And Jenna enlists the help of, I believe, I can't remember if he's retired or something, but he's a retired cop. And then she also enlists the help of a psychic, a quirky one at that. The story goes from there, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. The love a young girl has for her mom, it has a wonderful twist. I absolutely love this book, and it's a beautiful, beautiful rendering of the relationship between mother and daughter. This next book was also on my list of favorites for 2022. Of course, I'm going to be talking about a lot of my favorites, because what am I even doing here if I don't talk about the books that I love? This next book is Descent by Tim Johnston. This follows the Cortland family, mother, father, son, and daughter. The son and daughter, mostly Sean and Caitlin, they go on this summer vacation to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And one morning, Caitlin and Sean go into the woods because Caitlin is a track star. She's about to go off to college on a scholarship. She goes for a run, and Sean tags along, and something happens in the woods, and only Sean comes out. This story tells what happens to a family when one of the members goes missing, particularly one of the children goes missing. And it has a profound yet very different effect on each of the other family members, and you follow what happens to the other family members. There's a couple of just side stories that are super interesting. Usually side stories kind of annoy me, but not in this book. This book did start off kind of slow. I remember reviewing this book and just telling people, the first 50 pages, get past the first 50 pages, and then you'll be invested. It's really, really good. It really talks about what happens to a family when this happens, but the core of the story is the father never giving up and what he goes through to find out what happens to his daughter. It comes together in an amazing way at the end. I can't remember if there's a twist per se, but I do remember the last 50 to 100 pages was just dynamite exploding. It was amazing. So yes, that is the third book in this little subcategory of love between children and parents. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I would be remiss if I did not include the love between humans and animals. So that's what this next category is about. And I have 3 books to talk about in this category. There's so many that I've read that I can recommend, but This is a book about love and not about that genre. So I'm going to talk about 3 books, 3 of my favorites for this particular category. The first one I'll talk about is the one that I've read most recently. And when I say most recently, I mean either in the past year or the year before. And that is the Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This one follows Nana, the cat, and this story is from Nana's point of view as he goes on a road trip with his beloved owner, Satoru. Satoru is visiting different family members, different friends, and he is asking their help to take care of Nana for reasons that I won't discuss. And Nana doesn't know either. Nana. So Nana gets to meet a bunch of different people in Satoru's life. He has some good experiences, some not so good experiences, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Full disclosure, it's going to break your heart into a million pieces. Will it put it back together? Who's to say? You're going to have to find out for yourself, but the love is there. The love Satoru has for his beautiful, beautiful cat is just so endearing. If you're a cat person and a reader, I imagine you've already read this by now, but if you haven't, you got to move it to the top of your list. This next book I read many, many years ago, but it's a super popular book and for good reason. And that is The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. Oh my gosh, this is a beautiful story. This follows Enzo, who is a golden retriever. I can't remember if it's a golden retriever or a Labrador retriever. This is another book where it's told from Enzo's point of view. It's on the eve of his death, where he is taking stock of his life. So basically, he's telling you the story of his life and his owner, Denny Swift, who is an up-and-coming race car driver. And through Denny, Enzo kind of learns about the human condition and he comments on it. And it's a beautiful story and it's lovely and it's about loyalty and friendship and family and hope. And I absolutely love this one. If you're a dog person and you like to read, I imagine you've read this already, but if you haven't, move it up. You won't be sorry. And finally, in this category, I will talk about my favorite book for this category. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Modoc, The True Story of the Greatest Elephant That Ever Lived. This is by Ralph Helfer. This follows Ralph and Modoc, who grew up together really when Ralph was a young boy. His family worked in the circus, and he met Modoc as a young elephant. They became friends. They were very, very close, but as Ralph got older, of course, he went off and lived his life as a human. And you follow his story, but more so you follow Modoc's story. And that's a little bit more of a tragic tale in how elephants are treated. They're sent to work in circuses. They're sent to work in riding camps. And Modoc doesn't have a good life, and she's lonely, and she misses Ralph. It's a beautiful story. This one is a tearjerker, but there is hope. It doesn't have too terrible an ending, but it's absolutely beautiful. I will say that I sobbed my eyes out, not just one little tear going down my face. I sobbed, ugly cried twice in this book. Reader beware. The next category I have is one of my favorites to read about, and that is stories that surround the love between either siblings or lifelong friends. There's lots out there, I know. It was really hard to narrow this category down to just 4 books that I'm going to talk about. Each of these books really, really get to the core of the love between friends and or siblings. They are some of my favorite stories. So the first one I want to talk about is The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I read it many years ago. I think I even went to a signing for Khaled Hosseini, and it was just such a treat. But anyways, The Kite Runner takes place in Afghanistan in the 1970s, and you're following a friendship between Amir and Hassan. They're young boys. There's a really, really popular, important, significant kite fighting tournament that goes on in the town that they live in. Kind of is the catalyst for this story. Amir and Hassan, they're both desperate to win it. And it was during this tournament that something terrible happens to Hassan, and Amir witnesses it. And what he does afterwards kind of sets the rest of their lives on this path. It's heartbreaking. And as you're reading it, you're just desperate to know what happens next. Very shortly after this event, the Russians invade, and Amir's family is forced to flee. They flee to America, so you're following Hassan as his life goes on in Afghanistan, and the Taliban comes into the picture, and you're following Amir in America. And as an adult, he's realizing that he has to return to Afghanistan to sort stuff out. The story is just glorious. If you have not read, I would say, a modern day classic, you're missing out. It's such a beautiful story about friendship and loyalty, and the things we do to each other sometimes isn't the greatest. This is also a story about redemption, and it just hits the nail on the head when it comes to that. This might be one that I'll reread at some point. This next one isn't really marketed as, ooh, here's this great story between brother and sister, but it's really the core of the story, and it's such a great book that I couldn't help but put it on this list. The book I'm talking about is The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. This is one of those epic family dramas. It spans, I want to say, 40 years in one of the Carolinas, I believe. You're following the Wingo family. Specifically, you're following Tom Wingo and his sister Savannah Wingo, and they are the children of father is a fisherman and he's super abusive to his wife. Tom and Savannah have an older brother, Luke, I believe. You are following these three kids growing up in the marshes of the Carolinas and their volatile parents. Fast forward when Tom is an adult and he's got his own family, he's married, he's got children, he's got a successful career. His marriage is a little If you hear that clicking, that's Jake and he needs a pedicure bad. And anyways, over the years, Savannah has had problems. She has tried to commit suicide multiple times, and finally Savannah's psychiatrist, Dr. Lowenstein, reaches out to Tom and says, you need to come and you need to help her, because whatever is troubling her is something in her past. You know about it. There was something that happened to these kids when they were kids and living at home. Much like the Kite Runner, this event that happens just kind of sends these three kids on these different paths, and they have had their own individual struggles, very different struggles from each other, but struggles nonetheless. Tom is asked to come and help Savannah before her struggle ends in her death. Some who have read The Prince of Tides might think of this, well, this is a love story because Tom ends up kind of engaging in a relationship with Dr. Lowenstein. And that whole story is interesting and compelling and entertaining and fascinating and all of that. But the core of the story is the love Tom has for his sister Savannah, and all he wants is for her to be happy. But in order to get her to face what happened in their past, he's got to face it too, and that is no small feat. And it is an incredible story. If you love epic dramas, if you love the American South atmosphere, which is just delicious here, oh, you must read this book. It is so good. Now, this came out, I want to say, in the 80s. So it might read kind of dated. I don't care though. The story itself, if you really kind of appreciate just a story for what it is, you won't be disappointed in this one. This category wouldn't complete without, of course, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is one of my all-time favorite books as well. This is historical fiction, and it takes place during World War II, and it takes place in France, and it follows these two French sisters, Vianne and Isabelle. They are leading completely different lives in France. Now, historical fiction is one of my favorite genres, specifically when World War II is covered in the story. I don't know why. Maybe it's because that's the era of my grandparents. I don't know, but I'm drawn to World War II historical fiction. But this was the first one that I read that took place in France, like how France and the people of France were affected by World War II. I learned a lot in this book. But at the core of its story is you have Vianne, who lives in the French countryside with her husband and her daughter, and her husband goes off to fight the war, and she thinks she's just going to be waiting for him, and turns out Germany invades France and they take over. They move into the houses, basically enslave the French people. She deals with life with a German captain living in her home, taking what he wants and what he needs from Vianne. It's terrifying. Meanwhile, Isabelle she's a little bit more of a rebel, and she joins the resistance to fight the German invasion. They are very, very different in personality, and how they are managing their lives during the war. And it is, it's heartbreaking. I sobbed at the end of this one. Imagine most of you who are watching have probably read this by now. It was super popular when it came out, but I couldn't not include this book on this list. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful story. It's very well written. And sisters, man, I love a good story about sisters. And I just love the different point of view that this one had as far as what happened during World War II in France. I don't think it's written about enough. It was an eye-opener for sure. The story about the relationship between these sisters is just everything, and I could not include it in this list. But let's not end this category on a sad note. Let's end it on an uptick. A little quirky to add this particular book to this list, but I couldn't help myself. That is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This book was a hoot. If you get a chance, if you want to read it, and I'm telling you that you want to read it, listen to it. It was really, really well narrated. This is a mystery thriller. It takes place in Nigeria, and that in and of itself made it for a fascinating read. This one follows two sisters, Ayuda and Korede. They're super close, but they lead very different lives. Ayuda has a problem with the men that she dates. She murders them. Yes, just as it says on the tin, this is My Sister, the Serial Killer. But Ayula, when she does it, she always has an excuse, a seemingly good excuse, and she calls Korede to ask to help her to clean up the mess. Korede knows what Ayula is doing and kind of helps her out of her messes every single time, until Ayula starts to date a man that Korede has her eyes on. That's when things get sticky between the sisters. This is such a fun story. It's laugh out loud funny, it's super dark, and you want to know how it's going to play out. These two sisters, the dynamic between them is so unusual to read about, but the love is there, the loyalty is there, the sisterhood is there. Yes, I had to add it to this list. It is a must read. Okay, I'm going to succumb. I'm going to talk about books that include romantic love. I can't help myself. Now, while these books include a love story, I wouldn't say these books are marketed as romances. I don't think they are. There's a lot more to these books that I'm going to talk about than the love story. Absolutely 100% love each and every single one of these books and highly recommend them. So I'm just going to get that out now so I don't end up repeating myself. Oh, I love this book. I highly recommend it. Just consider that as kind of a blanket recommendation for these next books. But these books will make you, at the end, hold it to your chest and give the book a hug and leave you wanting more, but not in a bad way. This first book I'm going to talk about, I think, was in my top 3 favorite books of 2021, and that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I absolutely love this book. It was unlike anything I had read until I read that book. This is a Greek mythology retelling, and you're following Achilles and you're following Patroclus. They meet and become friends and maybe become a little bit more than friends. It's a delicious, delicious love story between Achilles and Patroclus, and I cried my eyes out at the end of this one. It's just beautiful. It's beautifully told. And what more can I say about this book that hasn't already been said? It's just beautiful. And if you want a good love story, but not a sappy romance story, please pick up Song of Achilles. The next book I want to talk about is The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. If you have seen this movie but haven't read the book, I implore you to pick it up. I used to say that the book is always better than the movie, but I have learned as time has gone on that that's not always the case. But the book is better than the movie most of the time, and this is one of those examples. So The Time Traveler's Wife follows Claire and Henry, and they love each other to bits. They are happily married. Henry suffers from like a rare genetic disorder where he can spontaneously be pulled in time either to his past or his future. Claire is aware of this disorder. She knows that at any given moment, Henry can leave her in her present time, but then also in other moments in time, Henry can pop into Claire's life as far back as when she's maybe 6 years old. It's an unusual love story. It's an unusual time travel story. And I just like how they blended the two. You're dealing with two people who love each other, and one of them time travels and not on purpose. Stuff happens, and it's great. Pick it up. This next book doesn't get talked about enough and gets a very unfair low rating on Goodreads. When people talk about the author Rainbow Rowell, they talk a lot about Fangirl and they talk about the Simon Snow series. They don't talk about this next book nearly enough, nearly as much as it should be talked about, and that is Landline. I love this book. I don't know what everybody else's problem with. It is so lowly rated. It's just sad to me. This story follows Georgie. She is married, I believe, with children. Marriage is on the rocks, and she doesn't quite know what to do about it. On the day that they're supposed to pick up and go on a road trip and visit Neil, her husband Neil's family in another state, Georgie says, you know what, I'm not going. And she knows deep in her heart that that's a mistake. Neil and the kids leave. Georgie stays home. But that night, Georgie finds out that she has this way to communicate with Neil from the past. And the story goes from there. She sees if she can't try to repair her marriage by communicating with past Neil. Now, it's been a long time since I read this, so if that is a really, really poor synopsis, I'm sorry, but that's the gist of it. It's so much fun. I love this book. It's just not talked about enough. If you like this author's writing, please pick this up if you haven't already. It's so much fun. Or does it have a happy ending? I really don't remember, but I just remember liking it a lot. This next one is highly rated, but it's by an author that doesn't get talked about enough. So the very first, I think, romance book that I ever read was The Promise by Danielle Steele. Now, Danielle Steele is a prolific romance writer. She's been around for 100 years. This book, it had such a profound effect on me as a reader because I think I read it as a teenager, and it's just such a great love story. This follows Michael and Nancy. Now, granted, I think this book was first published in the late 70s, so it's slightly dated. Anyways, Michael is an architect and he comes from a wealthy family. Nancy is an artist and her family is not so wealthy. And Michael's mom totally frowns upon their relationship, but they don't care. They're in love. Minutes before they're to be married, Michael and Nancy get in a terrible, terrible accident. And because of something shady that Michael's mom does, they end up leading entirely different lives after this accident. It's the story about if they find each other again and how they find each other again and will their love survive. Is it sappy? Perhaps. I absolutely love it. They made some cheesy made-for-TV movie, I think, about it, and it is, oh, they did such a bad job, but read this book. It's a palate cleanser, okay? It's super easy to read. It's 1977 Danielle Steele. Just pick it up. It's just so much fun and just such a great classic love story, I think. If you do end up reading it or you have read it, let me know. I want to know what you think. If you've watched my channel before, you know that I'm a huge Stephen King fan, so I couldn't not have a Stephen King book on this list, but you're saying to yourself, but Stephen King is a horror writer. Well, yes, he is. My one all-time favorite book that Stephen King wrote is actually a love story, but it also happens to be a ghost story, and that is Bag of Bones. I absolutely love this book, and it's my favorite because not only is it a ghost story and mystery suspense, but that it includes such a great love story in this. So this follows Mike. He is a best-selling novelist. After the death of his wife, which he cannot seem to get over, he decides to go to his childhood summertime home in, of course, Maine. And it's a summer home that he calls Sarah Laughs. Anyways, he goes and he decides to spend time there and try to regroup and grieve for his wife. Once he gets there, he finds that his childhood hometown is in the grips of this evil millionaire, Max. And Max's only goal in life is to take his 3-year-old granddaughter, Kira, away from his daughter-in-law, Maddie. Mike finds himself being sucked into this drama. And meanwhile, as he's in his home, Sarah Laughs, ghostly things start to happen. There is some spookiness in this novel, I'm not gonna lie. It's Stephen King, okay? But the love story in this is just divine. This is another one of those books, though, that, full disclosure, the first 100 pages are a little slow. But once you get through that, believe me, there's plenty of it because, again, it's Stephen King. So it's like a 600-page book. Actually, I think it's over 700 pages, but still. So yeah, slow start, but such a great love story, such a great ghost story as well, and this great thriller of what's happening with Maddie and her daughter and the evil Max. So much going on, and oh my gosh, please read it. Another great love story is, of course, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is so far my favorite TJR book. I don't know if it's because it was the first TJR that I read or not, but it remains my favorite of hers. Absolutely love this story. It's been talked to death on Booktube, so I won't go too deeply into it. Following Evelyn Hugo, she was a movie star back in the 50s, and she's kind of like the Elizabeth Taylor, who was famous from the time she was a movie star until her death. Kind of notorious like that. But now, as a retired elderly woman living in her mansion on Park Avenue or whatever, she decides to tell her story, but she only wants one young journalist, kind of an inexperienced young journalist, to tell her story to. And there's a reason behind that. Anyway, she tells her story of her 7 husbands, who they were, why she married them, but who her one great love was. There's 2 pretty big twists in this book that just punch you in the gut in the best way. I don't care what anybody says. This is TJR's best. It's my favorite. It's got a great love story. It's got multiple love stories, I think, but one in particular, so much fun. Highly recommend if you're looking for love. So this next one is kind of a surprise. It's going to be a surprise to you, but it was a surprise to me when I came across it. And here's why. If you've watched some of my previous videos, some of my recent previous videos, you know that I have a hard time with classics. I have mentioned in previous videos that I have yet to come across a classic that I love. I realized when I was doing research for this particular video that that's a lie. There is a classic that I absolutely loved, and I decided to add it to this list, and that is The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham. OMG, I love this book. Now, it's been a minute since I read it, and I read the book before I watched the movie, and I did see the movie, and they did a fantastic job, but the book was so good and so readable, which classics usually aren't for me. So this is set in England and Hong Kong during the 1920s. Specifically, you're following Kitty, and Kitty is married to a doctor, and he is kind of a workaholic, and he neglects her. And so Kitty has an affair, and her husband finds out about it. And to punish Kitty, and he forces her to accompany him to another country, I can't remember what it is, in the middle of a cholera epidemic. Kitty finds herself in this foreign country. There's no society, there's nothing for her to really do except just kind of sit there and be hated by her husband, and her husband just treats her horribly. The story goes from there. And I found this story just beautiful and lovely and beautifully written. I absolutely love this. I would have to say, if you are looking for a classic that is easier to read, that has an amazing story, I would definitely recommend The Painted Veil. I can't believe I have forgotten about this gem of a book, but I was happy to discover it again for this list. Please pick it up. And of course, to round out this list altogether is one of my favorite books of all time, and that is The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefderi. This is the ultimate, hold this book to your heart when you finish it. You are following Nuri and Afra. Nuri is a beekeeper, and his wife Afra is an artist. They love each other. They have a beautiful family. They're living in the city of Aleppo in Syria until bad things start happening in Syria. And then a really, really bad thing happens to Nuri and Afra, and this tragic loss kind of has a psychosomatic effect, and Afra loses her sight. Of course, that is a hardship that would happen to anybody, but as an artist, it really hits hard for Afra. So on top of all of that, bad stuff happens in Syria, and they are forced to flee their home to go on this trek towards Europe to find a new life. Not only is Afra affected by this blindness, but the thing that caused the blindness, which I won't spoil here, that's affecting them both, but Afra takes it even harder, and she has distanced herself emotionally from her husband. Not only is this the story of the journey that Nuri and Afra take to try to get from war-torn Syria to Europe, but it's also the journey of Nuri and Afra finding each other again. And it is so beautifully done. It's so beautifully written. I can't say enough about this book. If you are looking for just a beautiful love story wrapped in a historical fiction, you can't go wrong with this one. So that's it. Those are my anti-Valentine's Day list of books, which really, at the end of the day, it's all about love. You gotta love love. What'd you think? Have you read any of these books? Please, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or you can just say hi down in the doodly-doo. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.